on the show, we have Dr. Bonnie Wilens with us. Welcome, Bonnie, to the show.
Thank you.
Bonnie is known in the entire greater Boston area as Dr. Bonnie. And she is awesome because she has her own natural health care and family chiropractic business, which she's owner, co-founder of. And she does a whole variety of interesting things that we're going to talk about today. So first, before we get into the vast amount of treatments that you offer for people, I'm going to ask you, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland, outside Washington, D.C.
Oh, so interesting.
Yeah.
And did you always know at a young age that this is what you want to do with your life?
I didn't. No. Probably thought I was going to be a farmer or something like that. But healthcare, my mother was in healthcare. She was a nurse for 30 years. So we always listened to all the stories about patients in the hospital. Right. So I think it was by osmosis that I ended up in healthcare.
And did your family support you for career choices that you made?
Absolutely, very much.
And growing up in the place and the time that you did, was it something different and unusual for someone like you, a woman, to go into the medical field?
Well, not that I was really aware of. Since my mother was a nurse, it was always in my home. And with her being a working mother, I think it was just something that came naturally to me. I don't think I was very much aware of too much of what the other mothers were doing. I don't think the mothers were working. We lived in an area where my father worked for the Atomic Energy Commission, neighbors worked for NIH, and it was always the fathers going off to their scientific government jobs.
Oh, interesting. So you had one person in science and the other person in medicine in your family.
Yes.
So you're a sciencey family in general.
My father was a nuclear engineer.
Wow, look at that. Rocket scientist.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
So did you have someone, a teacher, a friend, someone who inspired you or gave you a push to go into being a chiropractor and practicing alternative medicines?
I'll give you the short version of a long story.
Sounds good.
So in 1986, I was in a head-on car crash. So I was a chiropractic patient first, and it wasn't for maybe 2 years after my accident that my body really changed quite a bit, and someone recommended that I go to a chiropractor. And at that point, I was a graduate of Cornell University with a degree in biology and anatomy and physiology, but wasn't quite sure what direction I was going to take that. The chiropractor that I happened to go to was also a Cornell grad. And he said to me one time, "Why don't you be a chiropractor?" And that was it. So he gave me a couple books to read. I started looking at all the different schools. It started to make sense to me. At that point, I was almost on my way to veterinarian school. And I realized that two things about that. I wanted to work with people more than animals. And in veterinary medicine, there wasn't as much of an opportunity to do natural medicine. And I realized in chiropractic that you could do not only structural work, you could do acupuncture, you could do nutritional medicine, you could work with just pediatrics, you could go into research, you could teach.
And that's what you mean by natural medicine, is all of that, all of the above.
All of those things were just in chiropractic, that you could do all those things just as a chiropractor. Because it afforded so many different choices, I realized that that gave me, a real broad future, and that I could take it step by step and see where it led me. And after I was practicing, I became a patient of natural medicine for my own personal reasons, and started to realize that you can take supplements and change the way you eat and your thoughts, and it would change your biochemistry.
And what kind of courses and additional classwork and sort of, what do I want to say, seminar series, things did you have to take in order to be a natural medicine doctor?
In chiropractic, you can go on, being a chiropractor is a graduate degree. So I have 4 years of undergrad, I'm graduating from Cornell, and then you go another 4 years. So being a doctor of chiropractic is a graduate degree, but there are then further graduate studies you can do. So you can take what are called diplomate courses in neurology, in orthopedics, clinical nutrition, pediatrics, et cetera. There are a number of different choices. So have gotten my diplomate from the American Chiropractic Board of Nutrition, which is like another graduate degree. Along with that, I think I have taken hundreds of seminars. There are so many talented chiropractors, MDs, DOs, acupuncturists, even dentists around the country teaching natural medicine.
And information.
And a ton of
continuously
information.
changing information that comes out of different people's personal experiences with different natural foods or
Their
supplements.
personal experience, but I think what's really important for people to know is that it's all research-based. So I hear often my patients say that they've heard from other people in their lives, oh, there's no research to show that or prove that. And there actually is so much research that I could spend the rest of my life reading it. So everything that we do is based on research into a particular supplement, how it affects the body, into a particular protocol, into different labs and ways of assessing, ways of thinking about the body. I've also studied with the Institute for Functional Medicine, so that's a very important organization run by PhDs who have written textbooks and teach seminars and do certifications of doctors, all based on research.
And I suppose that's also why it's important for patients to stick with one person, such as yourself, to track them through many years of natural medicines and supplements, so that there's because it's so individual, it's individual specific, and it's also you need a person who knows their thing to help guide you through it for a number of years.
Well, that is something that distinguishes natural functional medicine from other forms of care, is that it is individualized, and there isn't one thing to do for, you know, if 10 people with the same symptom, you give them all the same solution. It doesn't work that way. And it's also very different from symptom relief. So if you had a headache, you could take an aspirin and you could have the symptom go away in 30 minutes, but the cause could still be there. And the headache could come back the next day or a week later, or it could be a cyclical thing. And so when we're trying to deal with the cause, it is a little bit like rebuilding a house. So we call it the cornerstones of health. And you can look at the GI system and the liver and the gallbladder. That's a good place to start. The hormonal system, the cardiovascular, etc. There are a lot of different building blocks to health, and you can't necessarily fix them all, and they all affect each other.
So it's essentially haute couture, except it's for the body. It's biological high fashion.
I suppose you could put it that way.
For maximizing your personal, individual efficiency, and to know what works for you and to feel good, all the little areas you want to tweak that don't work for you.
So sometimes people come in with a specific symptom, and we're certainly trying to help them with that symptom, but I'm really trying to get to the cause. And then I had a perfect example the other day where I have a patient who I've been taking care of probably for 10 years, both structurally and biochemically. And she had just gotten to a point where we had fixed a number of things, and she said, you know, I just want to, let's just do some cleansing and make sure I'm not deficient in anything, and let's just, you know, not necessarily target any one symptom, but continue to build and add nutrients and rehab the system. Cleanse it, make sure the liver's working well. So there are a lot of different levels of approach. Sometimes it's targeted towards something, sometimes it's very general and just supportive.
So you may see patients sometimes in a period, depending on the period of their life and what they're going through, many times, and then sometimes you may see them once in 6 months.
Exactly. Sometimes I see patients, they come in, they're very, very sick. We get very complex patients. And I will spend an hour and a half with a new patient. We get such a complete history and design a program for them, usually in the first visit, maybe sometimes by the second visit. And sometimes I never hear from them again, or it might be a couple of years, or it might be someone, a new patient that came in referred by them, and that's all it took, was this one time. And it was very symptom directed. They feel fine, there's nothing they feel like they want to work on. And it's nice to get that kind of feedback and know that sometimes things were just very quick, too.
Right. And in your group, I know that you have other people as part of your practice.
That's true.
So what are the other services that, if we come into your clinic, what are the other facilities and services that one might be able to enjoy and experience?
Well, I think that's important when I'm rebuilding the body structurally in terms of the alignment of the bones and the pelvis and the spine, that we also work with the soft tissue. So the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, cartilage. Sometimes we might do that nutritionally, sometimes we might do that I might work with my hands with the soft tissue, but we also have Ellie Calhoun, who's not just a licensed massage therapist, but also does something called Rossiter, which is a very effective, quick way of working with the fascia and the muscles and some of that soft tissue to rehabilitate people who have an injury or a weak area or pain. So she does some very nice work with the soft tissue. We also have Mary Heath, who is a very professional hypnotherapist. And I have learned quite a bit from her. I always thought of that as, quit smoking and lose weight. And didn't think that being hypnotized really worked. Well, I've had my personal experience with her where I've just completely relaxed into a state that I thought I was asleep, but apparently I wasn't, and that's happened a number of times with her. But she has started taking care of patients with biochemical issues. People who faint, people who have adrenal issues, people who have digestive disorders, weight disorders, whether that be a hormonal. And it's interesting because she is able to reach a lot of different types of needs. So I'm really impressed with the work that she's doing.
So she's actually like a hypnotist and psychotherapist combined.
Kind of in a way, although she doesn't really do any analysis.
Right.
There's, an interview process. She gets to know the person.
Right.
And so she gets to be able to target the way to support you while you're in, I think she calls it an alpha state or a beta state, where your brain is just in a very relaxed place and receptive. So that's the kind of work that she's doing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you have a wide range of things that you take care of for people. So that includes nutritional endocrinology, mastering the thyroid, anti-aging, clinical challenges in women's health. How do you go through this huge area and manage to keep it all together and make it work?
Well, I have been practicing for 16 and a half years. And I certainly didn't become an expert at all those fields at once. I started with just the structural work and got very comfortable with that and did that for a number of years. And then really started with the areas that seem to be the building blocks where you need to start with people. So primarily gastrointestinal, liver and gallbladder is always a great place to start. I just did that kind of work for a number of years. Because we're such a stressed society, especially here in the Northeast, people's adrenal glands, which are like the gas pedal in the car, are pretty worn out. And there are a lot of
constantly firing.
They're constantly firing. It's kind of like the gas tank is running low. And when that happens, that has a number of consequences with blood sugar, female hormone, male hormone. It changes the brain. It changes the way the thyroid works. And so when you start to dive into that, then you have to really study quite a bit. So I spent a number of years studying with who I felt were some of the best natural medicine experts in hormonal, endocrine, adrenal, stress, the thyroid, the hypothalamus, pituitary, brain, which is like the conductor of all of the hormonal glands that we've named, most of them. So we got into that area, blood sugar and diabetes and weight issues.
If you had to pick an area that you think is right now in America is affecting the most number of people, what would that one area be?
That's exactly what I brought in today, because I think the number one thing that people suffer from is heart disease and cardiovascular disease.
So overstress, over diabetes, weight loss.
Diabetes and heart disease actually the same side or opposite sides of the same coin. So one leads to the other, and sometimes it's very difficult to tease out one condition from another. It's very much an interrelated network, a domino effect. Some of the symptoms that people are dealing with, we'll call it cardiovascular disease. But why do they have that? A lot of it's blood sugar and stress,
too much
diabetes. It can be too much salt, but
bad food.
Food definitely.
Yeah.
But and there is a list of things.
And so you would go through a nutritional workup with them as well.
Well, one of
what they're eating.
We go through a full history. We would go through what they're eating. Certainly, if someone is consuming too much alcohol or sugar or quick burning carbohydrates, and their diet is leaning towards the 4 stages of diabetes. So we have early stages that you don't necessarily pick up on a lab, called reactive hypoglycemia. Then you have insulin resistance. Then you have syndrome X, and all of that happens before it'll ever show on a fasting blood glucose. where they might say, oh, you're starting to look like you have type 2 diabetes. All of those things are actually leading to heart disease as well. It's impossible for them not to. Those types of changes start to affect the arteries in the body, and there are a number of things that can do that.
So how many Americans across the country suffer from cardiovascular problems of some kind or the other?
There are hundreds of thousands of them. I think it's the number one disease category in the country.
So sometimes it's not obvious in terms of having a heart attack, but it's
a very good point. There is a very interesting statistic that 50% of the people with heart disease have normal cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. And you don't pick that up on your routine blood test that you get once a year. So we suggest what's called an LPP test, which is an advanced breakdown of all of the risk factors that can lead to arterial disease before you might pick it up on a regular test. So I have a copy of that here, and that goes through, it's a very simple test. It's extremely inexpensive. Medicare covers it 100%.
So this test covers, it's a lab of lipoprotein particle numbers, biomarkers and risk factors, and a lipid panel.
Right. So one of the key things that you'll get on here is markers for inflammation.
Right.
Another one you'll get is markers for blood sugar problems. But even more importantly is you'll take those regular numbers you see on your lab test and you'll break them down into particle number and particle size, because you could have high LDL, for example, and it could be all the safe LDL. There is actually safe LDL. You could have low LDL and could be all the bad LDL, and you would not know that you're on a bad path or a good path. This test, in a very simple and straightforward fashion, I can look at it in about 30 seconds and see what's going on here, will tell you early markers for cardiovascular disease. But the most amazing thing about it is there are very safe, very natural ways to deal with this. There's certainly exercise and diet is important, but if your cholesterol is very high, if your small LDL is very high, if you've got not enough protective HDL and some of the other inflammatory markers, there are a number of natural products. We have a list of about 10 things that we use. One of the best examples is niacin, and there are very specific ways that you use a product like that, but it has so much research on it for lowering cholesterol, lowering the bad LDL, raising your HDL, lowering your triglycerides, getting the inflammation out, dealing with plaques. I mean, the list goes on, and that's not something that we read in a magazine. That is based on a world of good information. Yes, it wasn't a newsletter or a magazine you get in the mail.
So if a person has low LDLs, but they're all the bad ones, what would you do? Would you put them on like a daily supplement to sort of, would that be like a liver cleanse, or how would you eradicate?
There are specific programs, but certainly take a look at what they're eating. Although some of these fatty particles are more susceptible to what you're eating than others, so we determine that. Certainly look at exercise, because that's an important piece. Stress is a big piece, but then we design a program of supplementation along with that, depending upon which one of these markers is high and putting you at risk. You know, there's one particular marker here called LPA, and that tells us the tendency to throw clots and have strokes. You know, and if that, and I have this patient right here, the number is off the charts. It's showing in red, and it wasn't even measurable. It was like so high.
152 parts per million, or
152. Let's see. The units are milligram per deciliter.
Okay.
So you know the safe range is less than 50, and this person has 152.
Wow.
So that's a tendency to throw clots and have stroke. That's
even though they haven't had anything yet.
Even though they look absolutely healthy when they walk in the door, they exercise, you wouldn't be able to tell. And when you look at maybe the normal panel, it may not show up. So with that particular number, we have specific supplements to bring that number down. And the research shows there are specific things that will bring your LPA down.
And does your patient feel better, or have some kind of noticeable biochemical improvement or change, even though they didn't know, for example, that they have this this tendency for strokes and having clots?
It's an interesting question because sometimes people come in with symptoms,
Right.
and we certainly want to have them feel better.
Right.
But cardiovascular disease doesn't always have symptoms with it. As a matter of fact, sometimes your first symptom is dropping dead from a heart attack.
Right.
And that's part of the scary thing about cardiovascular disease is you don't always
Right.
have symptoms. As a matter of fact, you usually don't.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we love about this test is it's such an early window into some of those markers that put people at risk.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
So if there's a Wellesley High School girl who was graduating this year
Yeah.
and wanted to go into your field,
Oh,
what
yeah.
would you suggest that she do? Or where would you
When
suggest
she's
she
in
go?
high school, she wanted to go into natural medicine. There are a number of different paths. I would suggest as an undergrad to be probably a biology major. She could be either, when I was at Cornell as a biology major, you could be either anatomy and physiology, you could be a biochemistry major. There are a number of different subcategories in biology.
And would you recommend this field
Absolutely.
for people?
I think this is the future.
So for men and women?
Oh, definitely. I know, even in my career, I've had a practice for 16 and a half years and been out of school for 20, that I have seen it change so much over that time. The level of acceptance, the level of sophistication, the level of results that you can get with people. I think, the emperor is not wearing any clothes, and the people are starting to see that there are other ways that make more sense to deal with complex physiological imbalances that occur over a long time. It's not just about taking away a symptom, and it's really about changing the way your body's functioning.
I remember you were telling me this story about a patient of yours who had a terrible trouble holding anything in his hands.
Yeah.
Because he had this very difficult, painful
Oh,
skin
right.
condition.
That's right.
And you found out that was actually caused by a gluten allergy.
Yes. Yep.
And now he's well.
Some things are just very, very simple, and it's not complex physiology.
Right.
This patient came in. He happened to be a police officer. He could not hold his gun. His hands were so cracked and bleeding and like leather that he couldn't grip anything. And it simply was that the man had an allergy to gluten. And
how did you determine that?
Well,
Was
that's
yeah, that must not have been a simple two-step process.
That's a little bit of a story.
Right.
Food allergies or food sensitivities, because they're not necessarily
Right.
an outright allergy.
And do you feel that those kinds of symptoms, those foodborne or gluten-type allergies, are increasing in our population over the
They
last
definitely
10,
are.
20 years?
Yes, and I think there's a long list of reasons, but absolutely. Food sensitivities and the breakdown of people's health is increasing.
Right.
And like I said, there's a long list of reasons. You can point to food,
Right.
you can point to stress, you can point to a lot of the chemicals
Right.
that people are exposed to, whether that be mercury in your teeth or something that's environmental.
Right. It's so interesting. So I have to ask you this question because we're actually, 2013, we're on the 50th anniversary of the women's movement.
Ah.
And I'm always interested in asking people who come on the show how they feel about that, whether you were affected by the women's movement or impacted by it in any way when it started, or even now. Where do you think women are today?
Well, I was a kid in the 60s and the 70s, and so a lot of that was going on at that time, but I was much more of a tomboy. I spent all my time with boys. I played on the boys' football team.
And your brothers?
And I have older brothers, and women's issues were really not in the forefront of my mind. I think probably one of the biggest influences was my mother, the fact that she was so brilliant and she worked, and that was set a good example, and the fact that she made such a difference for so many patients. I think that's where my biggest influence was.
And it's a sort of the role model that you're accustomed to having as somebody who considers their career important.
Yeah, she always had a career.
Right.
As far as, I was the last of 4 kids,
Right.
so I think she might have taken a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
Before I arrived, but
Right.
by the time I was sort of stabilized, she was back at work, and I'd always known her to be working.
And your business, I mean, being the founder of your practice and seeing the number of patients that you see and the number of people that you're constantly tweaking and taking care of, it's a pretty busy life.
It's a very busy life.
Especially for being a woman and a mother.
Right.
How do you manage all that? What is your advice to like a Wellesley High School girl, or even a Wellesley College girl who's graduating? I just attended 2 graduations, so I'm sort of going between the high school and the
Right.
college.
I would say follow your dreams and don't be worried about being able to handle it, because those things you will figure out along the way. But most importantly, build a team of support around you and ask for help and be moderate in all that you do. I don't work more than 30 or 35 hours a week. And
But I'm sure you have emergencies. So you probably end up breaking that rule once in a while.
Well, that's one thing about being your own boss.
Right.
My daughter, who's 11 and a half, is very healthy.
Okay.
She doesn't take any medicine. She's rarely sick. So that is very fortunate. On the rare occasion she needs to stay home, she often will just crawl up on the couch in my office, which is just as good as crawling up on the couch at home.
Right.
Or I will cancel my patients if I have to, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
So being your own boss affords me that sort of flexibility, but I'm fortunate that that's not where the real need lies. It's cooking, cleaning, the house, the kids' schedule, the patients, all the patients' needs, the animals,
Right.
building in my own health care, exercising, all those things.
Right.
So I try to do a little bit of everything.
So prioritize your own health care before the house cleaning.
Oh yeah, I go to the gym. I go to the gym and I'll walk out if the house is dirty. I have set hours that I go.
That's great. So if there's
Yeah.
one piece of advice you have to give to women over 40, what would it be?
Get your adrenals checked by somebody who can make sure that they're ready for the hormonal changes coming down the road. Because when we go into perimenopause and menopause, the ovaries produce less hormones. You need that backup system. That's your strength. That's your
adrenals.
motor. And they are designed to take over the role of the ovary. And when you don't have those systems functioning, it's very difficult to handle any kind of stress, including the stress of hormonal changes. And anything that you might be dealing with at home or at work. You've got to keep the gas tank full.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you, Bonnie.
You're welcome.
That was awesome. I always
Yeah.
find that I have so much to talk to you about. That the time is never enough.
Oh, that was fast. We could
Yes.
do this again. For
we
sure.
We have to have you back for a supplemental chat.
We could
but
go into something
Some
specific.
of the more specific things that you
Yeah.
know, and examples of patients that you treat.
Sure,
That
absolutely.
would be awesome. And so again, I want to tell everyone who's watching the video that your website is drbonnie.net
Correct.
and
Doctor spelled out.
right,
DOCTOR.
and then bonnie.bonnie.net.
With an IE. Correct.
Perfect. Great.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.